The night I was sold for $10. Who wants this useless wife? My husband said it into a microphone. The room exploded with laughter. For a second, I honestly thought I had misheard him. I was sitting at table 12 in the ballroom of the Heritage Oaks Country Club outside Columbus, Ohio. The annual Children's Hope Foundation Gala was supposed to be one of those polished local charity events. White tablecloths, silent auctions, overcooked chicken, and people pretending to enjoy each other's company. There were around 160 guests that night. Business owners, city officials, church leaders, and every single one of them had just heard my husband ask who wanted to buy me. I sat frozen in my chair. Richard Miller stood under the spotlight wearing his expensive navy suit and his usual grin. At 61, he had the confidence of a man who hadn't been told no in a very long time. The laughter continued. He pointed directly at me. "There she is," he said. 33 years old when I married her. 33 years later, she's still retired. More laughter. Someone at a nearby table nearly spit out his drink. Richard loved being the center of attention. The richer he became, the worse it got. What started years ago as harmless jokes had slowly turned into something else. He liked embarrassing people, especially me. I lowered my eyes to my water glass. My hands were shaking. "Come on," Richard continued. "Let's have some fun. Who wants Susan?" The crowd laughed again. A few people looked uncomfortable. Not enough. $10, a man called from the back. The room roared. Richard pointed. "Sold for $10 already, anybody going higher?" I heard the laughter but felt strangely disconnected from it, as if I were watching someone else's life. Maybe that's what humiliation does. Maybe your brain protects you. I stared at the white linen tablecloth, at the silverware, at the small stain on the edge of my napkin, anywhere except the stage. My friend Linda was sitting beside me. "Susan," she whispered, "this has gone too far." I nodded slightly, but I didn't say anything. For 33 years I had become very good at staying quiet. Then everything changed. A voice came from the back of the ballroom. Calm, clear, confident. $1 million. Silence. Absolute silence. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. Richard blinked. "What?" The voice repeated it. $1 million. Every head in the room turned, including mine. Near the entrance stood a tall, gray-haired man in a dark suit. My heart nearly stopped. I knew that face. Older, wider around the shoulders, lines around the eyes, but unmistakable. Michael Dawson. I hadn't seen him in more than 40 years. Richard laughed awkwardly. "Well, somebody's got a sense of humor." Michael didn't smile. "I'm serious." The room felt suddenly smaller. Richard's grin began slipping. "Mike, right, that's a joke." "No," Michael said. "The joke was everything that happened before I spoke." You could have heard a pin drop. Several people shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A woman at a nearby table looked down at her plate. Michael slowly looked around the room. At some point, every person here had the chance to stop this. Nobody spoke. Richard cleared his throat. "Well, let's not get dramatic." "Dramatic?" Michael asked. "You just auctioned your wife in front of a room full of strangers." A few guests started looking toward the exits. The atmosphere had completely changed. Richard forced a laugh. "It's called humor." Michael's expression never moved. Not to her. For the first time all evening, somebody looked directly at me. Not through me, at me. And somehow that almost made me cry. The event organizer rushed onto the stage and quickly tried to move things along. The band started playing. People began talking again. The spell broke. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not for me. Not for Richard. And definitely not for Michael. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People avoided eye contact. A few women quietly squeezed my shoulder as they walked by. Others pretended nothing had happened. That's how small-town social circles work sometimes. People don't know whether to acknowledge something ugly or ignore it. Usually they choose the easier option. Around 10:30, the event finally ended. Richard was furious. Not at himself. At Michael. We walked through the parking lot toward our Lexus. The June air was warm and sticky. Crickets chirped from the trees lining the golf course. Richard yanked open the driver's door. "Can you believe that guy?" I stared out across the dark parking lot. "Which guy? You know exactly who." I said nothing. Richard started the engine. That stunt made me look ridiculous. I almost laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because after everything that happened, that was his concern. His image. His embarrassment. Nothing else. The drive home took about 30 minutes. Neither of us spoke much. Streetlights flashed across the windshield. The radio played softly. When we pulled into our driveway in Dublin, Ohio, Richard finally looked at me. You know him? My stomach tightened. Who? The millionaire. I hesitated. Years ago. How many years? A long time. Richard narrowed his eyes. Then he shrugged. Whatever. He climbed out of the SUV and headed inside. Just like that. No apology. No acknowledgement. Nothing. I remained sitting in the passenger seat. The garage was quiet. I could hear the ticking of the cooling engine. My reflection stared back from the dark window. 58 years old. Mother of 2. Grandmother of 3. Married for over 3 decades. And somehow I felt more uncertain than I had at 20. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. I opened it. Only one sentence appeared. I never forgot what you did for me. We need to talk, Michael. I stared at the screen. My pulse quickened. Because I remembered Michael. I remembered everything. And more importantly, I remembered the secret. A secret Richard Miller had never known. A secret that suddenly explained why Michael's face had looked so serious when he saw me on that stage. I sat in the dark garage for nearly 10 minutes before finally going inside. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Richard wanted. I was thinking about the past. And I had a feeling it was about to change my future. I barely slept that night. Richard fell asleep within minutes, snoring softly beside me like nothing unusual had happened. Around 2 in the morning, I was sitting alone in the kitchen wearing an old Ohio State sweatshirt, staring at a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. My phone sat on the table. Michael's message remained open. I never forgot what you did for me. We need to talk. I must have read it 20 times. The strange thing was I wasn't scared of seeing Michael again. I was scared of remembering who I used to be. By 6:30, I was already dressed and heading to Kroger for groceries. It was my normal Thursday routine. For 33 years, routines had been my comfort zone. Milk, eggs, bananas, dog food, life's ordinary details. But that morning nothing felt ordinary. People were already talking. At the bakery counter, 2 women from church stopped speaking when they saw me. One gave me an awkward smile. The other looked embarrassed. News traveled fast in suburban Ohio, especially when it involved public humiliation. By the time I got home, Richard was sitting in his home office. He looked unusually cheerful. What are you smiling about? I asked. He spun his laptop around. The gala video was online. Thousands of views. Comments pouring in. Some were laughing. Others weren't. Richard shook his head. People take everything too seriously. I stared at him. You auctioned your wife. It was a joke. It wasn't funny. He rolled his eyes. Well, apparently your millionaire boyfriend didn't think so either. There it was. The jealousy. The suspicion. The accusation. I quietly set down the groceries. Michael isn't my boyfriend. Richard smirked. You seemed pretty interested when he showed up. For a moment I considered telling him the truth. Then I realized something. For 33 years I had explained myself, defended myself, justified myself, and somehow it was never enough. So I simply walked away. That afternoon Michael called. His voice sounded older but familiar. Would you be willing to meet? I hesitated. Why now? Because after what happened last night, I think it's time. We agreed to meet the next day. A Cracker Barrel just off Interstate 71. Halfway between our homes, the same kind of place where retired couples gathered for breakfast and truckers stopped for coffee. Nothing fancy. Which somehow felt right. The next morning I drove north under gray skies. The farther I got from home, the lighter I felt. Not happy. Just lighter. Michael was already there when I arrived. He stood when he saw me. For a second, neither of us spoke. 42 years is a long time. Then he smiled. And suddenly I saw the 20-year-old man I once knew. Hi, Susan. Hi, Michael. We sat down, ordered coffee, and spent several minutes talking about harmless things. Children, grandchildren, health problems, retirement plans, the normal subjects people discuss when they reach our age. Finally, Michael leaned back. You look exactly the same. I laughed. You're either blind or very polite. A little of both. That broke the tension. For the first time since the gala, I relaxed. Then Michael grew serious. I'm sorry about what happened. I looked down at my coffee. You weren't the one holding the microphone. No, but I should have said something sooner. I looked up. What do you mean? Michael sighed. For years I'd hear things about Richard. What kind of things? How he talked about you. My stomach tightened. Michael continued carefully. He made people believe you didn't contribute much. I stared out the window. Cars passed on the interstate beyond the parking lot. I got used to that. You shouldn't have. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question that had been bothering me. The $1 million bid. Michael smiled slightly. That wasn't about buying you? I figured. It was about reminding everybody in that room that human beings aren't property. I nodded. Part of me felt relieved. Another part felt foolish for wondering. Then Michael reached into a leather briefcase beside him. My pulse quickened. He placed a thick folder on the table. I've been carrying this around for months. I looked at it. What is it? Something I owe you. I laughed nervously. You don't owe me anything. Michael shook his head. Actually, I do. And suddenly I was 20 years old again. Summer of 1984. Dayton, Ohio. A tiny apartment. No air conditioning. Cheap furniture. Big dreams. Back then, Michael wanted to start a manufacturing business. Everybody thought he was crazy. Banks wouldn't lend to him. Investors weren't interested. Even his own family doubted him. But I believed in him. Not because I thought he'd become wealthy, because I believed in him. Then life happened. My father suffered a serious stroke. My family needed help. College disappeared from the picture. Michael got an opportunity in another state. We tried long distance. It didn't work. No betrayal. No dramatic breakup. Just two young people moving in different directions. But before he left, I had done something nobody knew about. Not even Richard. I had inherited a small amount of money from my grandmother. Most people my age would laugh at the amount now. Back then it felt enormous. $25,000. Every penny I had. I loaned it to Michael. No lawyers. No contracts. Just trust. He tried refusing. I insisted. I believed he would make something of himself. Eventually he accepted. Then life carried us apart. I never expected to see that money again. Honestly, I forgot about it. Michael slowly pushed the folder toward me. You were the first person who ever invested in me. I opened it. Inside were financial statements, legal documents, investment records. Numbers covered every page. I looked up. Confused. What am I looking at? Michael smiled. The repayment. I blinked. The what? The loan. I laughed. Michael, that was 40 years ago. I know. That money's gone. No. His eyes met mine. It isn't. My heart began beating faster. How much are we talking about? He named a number. I thought I misheard him. Then he repeated it. Almost $2 million. I stared at him, unable to speak, unable to process it, unable to understand how one forgotten decision from 1984 could suddenly walk back into my life. But Michael wasn't finished. His expression changed. The smile disappeared. Susan, there's another reason I asked you here. The folder wasn't the only thing he had brought. There are some things you need to know about Richard. A chill ran through me. What things? Michael opened his briefcase again. This time he pulled out a second folder. Thicker, heavier, and whatever was inside clearly wasn't good. I recently reviewed documents connected to a business acquisition. I frowned. Okay, what I found concerned me. My stomach dropped. Michael slid the second folder across the table. I think your husband has been hiding something from you. I stared at the folder, then at Michael, and suddenly the repayment money no longer felt like the biggest surprise of the day. Not even close. I didn't open the second folder right away. Honestly, I didn't want to. For nearly 33 years, I had built my life around certain assumptions. Maybe they weren't perfect assumptions, but they were familiar. And familiar things can feel safer than the truth. After leaving the Cracker Barrel, I drove around for almost an hour before heading home. The folder sat on the passenger seat. Every time I glanced at it, my stomach tightened. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I had convinced myself Michael was probably mistaken. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. Maybe the documents didn't mean what he thought they meant. Maybe. That's a powerful word when you're trying not to face reality. Richard wasn't home. His truck was gone. The house felt unusually quiet. I carried the folder inside and set it on the kitchen table. Then I walked away from it. I watered the flowers, folded laundry, cleaned a bathroom that didn't need cleaning. Anything to avoid opening it. Finally, around 4 o'clock, I sat down and looked inside. The first document was a property record. The second was a bank statement. The third was another property record. Then another. And another. By the time I finished the first 20 pages, my hands were trembling. Several investment properties were listed. Apartment buildings, commercial spaces, rental homes, properties worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, some worth more. I had never heard of most of them. My name wasn't listed anywhere, only Richard's. I kept reading. Transfer records, business transactions, investment accounts, financial statements. The deeper I went, the worse it looked. I wasn't seeing one hidden asset. I was seeing a pattern, a very deliberate pattern. When Richard came home around 6, I had already put everything back into the folder. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. He walked into the kitchen carrying takeout from Texas Roadhouse. Thought I'd save you from cooking. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because for years, small gestures like that had convinced me everything was okay. We ate dinner mostly in silence. He talked about a construction project. I nodded when appropriate. Meanwhile, my mind kept replaying numbers from the documents. Finally, he noticed. "What's wrong with you?" I looked up. "Nothing." "You sure? Just tired." He accepted the answer immediately. That bothered me more than if he had pressed. A husband should know when something is wrong. Shouldn't he? That night after Richard went to bed, I called Michael. I looked at the documents. A pause. "How bad is it?" he asked softly. "I don't know." "Have you spoken to an attorney?" "No." "You should." The next morning I made the call. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted a divorce. I wanted facts. Nothing more. The attorney's name was Karen Whitmore. A friend from church had recommended her years earlier. Karen's office sat in a brick building near downtown Columbus. She looked to be in her early 60s. Sharp eyes, practical manner, the kind of woman who didn't waste words. I handed her the folder. She spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing documents while I sat quietly across from her desk. Finally, she removed her glasses. "When did you discover all this?" "2 days ago." "And you had no knowledge of these assets?" "No." Karen leaned back. The expression on her face wasn't encouraging. "What are you thinking?" I asked. "I'm thinking this deserves a closer look." My heart sank. "So Michael wasn't wrong?" "No." She folded her hands. At first glance, these documents raised several serious questions. I looked out her office window. Traffic moved steadily below. People walked along sidewalks. Normal life continued. Mine suddenly felt anything but normal. Karen spoke carefully. "Let's start with something simple. During your marriage, did you contribute to your husband's business?" I almost laughed. "Of course." "How?" I started listing things: bookkeeping, payroll, scheduling, customer calls, bank meetings, loan paperwork, vendor negotiations, tax preparation assistance, emergency problem solving. The list kept growing. Karen's eyebrows slowly rose. "And were you paid?" "Not really." "Did your husband publicly acknowledge your role?" I smiled bitterly. "Not recently." The truth was, I had helped build Miller Construction from the ground up. When Richard started the company, we had almost nothing. I worked evenings, answered phones from our kitchen, balanced books after putting the kids to bed. I even signed paperwork that helped secure early loans. At the time, I never thought of it as sacrifice. It was simply marriage, or at least what I thought marriage was supposed to be. Karen opened another document, then another. Then she looked directly at me. "Susan, I need to ask something difficult." "Okay." "Has your husband ever made you feel like your contributions didn't matter?" I stared at her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then memories began surfacing. Business dinners, family gatherings, church events, little comments, little jokes, little dismissals. Thousands of tiny cuts spread over decades. I swallowed hard. "Yes." Karen nodded slowly. "As I suspected." The next several weeks became a blur. More records appeared. More questions emerged. More surprises surfaced. At first I expected a few hidden accounts. Instead, every answer seemed to uncover another layer. One afternoon, Karen called. "You need to come in." Her tone immediately worried me. When I arrived, she slid several documents across the desk. "Look at these signatures." I stared, then froze. My name appeared on several early loan guarantees, documents from decades ago. I remembered signing them. Back when the company was struggling. Back when failure felt possible. Karen tapped the pages. "Without these guarantees, some of these loans likely wouldn't have been approved." I looked up. "What does that mean?" "It means you carried significant financial risk." I sat silently. The realization hit harder than I expected. For years, Richard had told everyone he built the company himself. The self-made businessman. The hard-working entrepreneur. The local success story. Meanwhile, documents showed something very different. I wasn't a spectator. I had been one of the foundations. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about our grandson, Tyler. A few weeks earlier, he had tried teaching me how to use financial software on my laptop. The lesson had gone terribly. At one point, I accidentally locked myself out 3 times. Tyler laughed so hard he nearly fell off the couch. "Grandma, you're fighting the computer like it's a burglar." Remembering that moment made me smile. A small smile. But I needed it, because everything else felt heavy. The following Monday, Karen called again. This time her voice carried an energy I hadn't heard before. "Susan, we've made significant progress." "Good progress." "Very good." I sat down immediately. "What did you find?" There was a brief pause. Then Karen delivered the sentence that changed everything. "Susan, legally speaking, half of what Richard thinks belongs exclusively to him may actually belong to you." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the chair. And for the first time since the auction, I realized something important. This wasn't just about humiliation anymore. This was about the truth. And the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The first person to find out I had hired an attorney wasn't Richard. It was our son. And that conversation did not go well. "His name is Brian." He was 31 at the time, married with 2 little girls living about 20 minutes away in Hilliard. He called me one Saturday morning. "Dad says you're talking to divorce lawyers." I was standing in my kitchen making coffee. I closed my eyes. Of course, Richard had gotten to him first. "I am talking to an attorney." There was a long silence. Then Brian sighed. "Mom, isn't this a little extreme?" That hurt more than I expected. Not because he disagreed. Because I could hear Richard's voice underneath his words. The same story. The same version of events. The same carefully crafted image. "I don't know everything yet," I said calmly. "Then why blow up the family?" I looked out the window toward the backyard. Toward the swing set Richard had built when Brian was 5. Toward the maple tree we planted the year he started kindergarten. Sometimes motherhood is strange. You spend decades protecting your children. Then one day they're adults and you realize they don't actually know everything about you. "I love you," I told him. "But there are things you don't understand yet." He didn't sound convinced. Neither of us felt good when the call ended. The following weeks were some of the loneliest of my life. Not because I was alone. Because I wasn't sure who was truly on my side. A few friends stopped calling. Others suddenly became very busy. People who had known me for years acted uncomfortable around me. One woman from church pulled me aside after Sunday service. "Susan, maybe forgiveness is the better path." I smiled politely. "I haven't stopped forgiving anyone." She looked confused. I continued. "But forgiveness and accountability aren't the same thing." She didn't know what to say after that. The truth was, even I wasn't completely sure what I was doing anymore. There were nights when I sat awake wondering if I should simply walk away, take whatever peace remained and move on. No legal battles. No public embarrassment. No confrontation. Just leave. But every time I considered it, I remembered the ballroom. I remembered the laughter. Not because it hurt. Because it revealed something. That night hadn't created a problem. It exposed one. Meanwhile, Richard was becoming increasingly difficult. At first he tried charm. Flowers appeared on the kitchen counter. Expensive dinners were suggested. A weekend trip to Nashville. As if a few gifts could erase years of disrespect. When that didn't work, he switched tactics. One evening he cornered me in the living room. "You've been talking to people behind my back." I set down my book. "You mean my attorney?" His jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous." "Is it?" "Susan, you're being manipulated." I almost laughed. The irony was unbelievable. For decades I had followed his lead. Now suddenly I was being manipulated. He paced across the room. "Who put these ideas in your head?" I looked directly at him. "The documents did." That stopped him. Only for a second. Then he recovered. "Those papers don't tell the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story." He didn't. Because he couldn't. Instead he left the room. A door slammed upstairs, and for the first time in years I wasn't the one apologizing afterward. Around that same time, something unexpected happened. The gala video resurfaced online. Apparently one of the guests had uploaded a longer version. Not just the joke. The entire exchange, including Michael's response. The reaction was very different this time. People weren't laughing. They were angry. Local social media pages picked it up. Comment sections exploded. Former clients of Richard's company started sharing stories. Business contacts weighed in. A local radio host even mentioned it during a morning segment. Richard was furious. People are overreacting. But public opinion wasn't moving in his favor. Then the phone calls started. Not from reporters. From former employees. The first was a man named Carl. He had worked for Miller Construction nearly 15 years earlier. "Mrs. Miller." "Yes. This may sound strange, but I wanted you to know something." I sat down. "What is it?" Carl hesitated. Back in 2008, payroll almost didn't go out. I frowned. I remember that. The recession had hit hard. Richard always told everyone he solved it. Carl laughed softly. No, ma'am. What do you mean? You did. One memory came rushing back. A frantic week. Cash flow problems. Employees worried about missing paychecks. I had quietly arranged a temporary solution through personal savings. Nobody outside the company knew. Carl continued. There are a lot of stories like that. As it turned out, he was right. Over the next month, more former employees contacted me. Some by phone, some by email, some in person. Again and again, I heard the same thing. Whenever a crisis happened, Susan fixed it. Whenever a problem got solved, Richard took the credit. I wasn't discovering new information. I was hearing my own history from other people's mouths. And somehow that made it feel real. Then came the biggest surprise. A letter arrived from the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. Richard had been selected to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. The ceremony would take place at a large business banquet downtown. More than 200 guests were expected. Business leaders, investors, local media, the works. When I heard the news, my first reaction was disbelief. Then Karen called. You should attend. I nearly dropped the phone. Absolutely not. Why, because I don't want a scene. Karen paused, then said quietly, What if the scene is already happening? I knew what she meant. For weeks, our legal team had been gathering evidence, documents, records, statements, financial information. The case was becoming stronger every day, strong enough that Richard's attorneys had started looking nervous. Still, I resisted. I wasn't a public speaker. I hated attention. The thought of standing in front of a ballroom made me sick. The closer the event got, the more anxious I became. 3 separate times I decided not to go. 3 separate times I changed my mind. The night of the banquet arrived. Downtown Columbus glittered beneath the evening sky. I parked in the garage beside the convention center and sat in my car for almost 15 minutes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The folder rested beside me. Inside were years of evidence. Years of truth. Years of things I had never said aloud. I considered driving away. Nobody would blame me. Nobody would even know. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from Brian. Just 6 words. I'm coming tonight. Love you, Mom. I stared at the screen. Something inside me settled. Not completely, but enough. I picked up the folder, stepped out of the car, and walked toward the ballroom. Inside, more than 200 people filled the room. At the front sat Richard, smiling, confident, ready to accept an award celebrating the life he claimed to have built alone. The announcer approached the microphone. The applause began. Richard rose from his chair. And at that exact moment, carrying a folder thick with evidence, I walked through the ballroom doors. The applause was already filling the ballroom when I stepped inside. For a second, nobody noticed me. All eyes were on Richard. He was halfway to the stage, smiling that familiar smile, shaking hands as he walked. The banner behind him read, Columbus Chamber of Commerce, Lifetime Achievement Award. I stood near the entrance, holding my folder against my chest. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I almost turned around. I wish I could tell you I felt fearless. I didn't. I felt like a 58-year-old grandmother who wanted to go home and hide under a blanket. Then I spotted Brian. Our eyes met across the room. He gave me a small nod. Not dramatic, not emotional, just enough. And somehow that was exactly what I needed. The announcer continued speaking. Tonight we honor a businessman whose leadership has helped shape our community. I slowly walked toward the front. Karen was already there. So was Michael. Neither said a word. They simply stood, waiting. The speech ended. The audience applauded again. Richard accepted the award and stepped to the microphone. Thank you, he began. The room quieted. He launched into a story about hard work, about sacrifice, about building a company from nothing. The same story he had told for years, only this time I heard it differently. Not because every part was false, because it wasn't the whole truth. About 3 minutes into the speech, Karen stood. Several people noticed immediately. Then I stood beside her. A few heads turned. Whispers spread. Richard stopped talking. His smile faded. Just slightly. The event coordinator approached us. Karen quietly handed her a document. The coordinator read it, looked surprised, then nodded. A minute later, she walked onto the stage. She whispered something to Richard. His expression changed instantly. What he asked. The microphone picked it up. A few people exchanged confused looks. The coordinator turned toward the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, there is a matter that requires attention. Now the room was completely silent. She looked toward me. Susan Miller has requested an opportunity to speak. Richard stared at me. The color had already begun leaving his face. I walked toward the stage. Every step felt heavier than the last. The folder suddenly seemed to weigh 50 pounds. Yet somehow I kept moving. When I reached the microphone, I took a breath. Then another. 200 people watched. I recognized many of them. Neighbors, friends, business associates, people from church, people who had laughed that night. I looked at Richard, then at the audience. My name is Susan Miller. A few nervous chuckles drifted through the room. I continued. Many of you already know me. The room grew still again. Some of you may remember seeing me a few weeks ago at the Children's Hope Foundation Gala. Now nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I was the woman being auctioned. A few people lowered their eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably. I wasn't there to shame them. Honestly, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of staying silent. So I simply told the truth. I spoke about our early years. The tiny house. The unpaid work. The late nights balancing company books at the kitchen table. The bank meetings. The loan guarantees. The risks. The sacrifices. The things nobody saw. I never raised my voice. I never insulted Richard. I didn't need to. The document spoke louder than I could. One by one, Karen provided copies, property records, financial records, business records, evidence of hidden assets, evidence of my involvement, evidence of years of omissions. The audience watched quietly. The further we went, the harder it became for Richard to interrupt. Because facts are stubborn things. Eventually, someone from the Chambers Board requested a brief recess. The award presentation stopped. Questions began. Lots of questions. The board members looked stunned. Several local business leaders looked even more shocked. Then something happened I wasn't expecting. Former employees started standing up, one after another. Carl spoke first. Then another man. Then a woman who had worked in accounting years ago. Each shared stories. Small stories. Specific stories. Stories that painted a very different picture of Miller Construction's history. I sat quietly listening. For once, I wasn't the one defending my contributions. Other people were doing it for me. Then I heard a voice from the back of the room. Mom? I turned. Brian stood there. My son looked nervous. His face was red, but he kept walking forward. The room watched. So did Richard. Brian stopped beside me. Then he turned toward the audience. I owe my mother an apology. I felt tears immediately. Not because he chose me, because I knew how difficult this was. He swallowed hard. For weeks, I believed things that weren't true. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I couldn't speak. I simply reached for his hand. The room remained silent. A few people wiped their eyes. Even Karen looked emotional. Richard didn't. He looked defeated. Not destroyed. Not ruined. Just confronted by reality. And reality can be difficult when you've spent years controlling the narrative. A short time later, the chamber announced that the award would be suspended pending further review. Richard sat alone at a table near the stage. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Nobody laughed. The evening ended quietly, which somehow felt right. No dramatic explosion. No shouting match. Just truth finally catching up. A few weeks later, legal negotiations accelerated. The evidence was overwhelming. Eventually, a settlement was reached. A fair one. Not perfect, but fair. For the first time in decades, I had financial security that truly belonged to me. As for Michael, people kept assuming there was some romantic ending waiting to happen. There wasn't. And honestly, that's one of my favorite parts of the story. A month after the banquet, we met for lunch. I finally asked him, "Why did you really bid $1 million?" He smiled. The same calm smile I'd seen at the gala. Because nobody should sit in a room full of people and be treated like they don't matter. That was it. No hidden agenda. No grand romance. Just decency. Michael remained a good friend. Nothing more. Nothing less. The repayment funds he insisted on giving me helped launch something new. A scholarship program for women over 40 returning to school or job training. Women who had spent years putting everyone else first. Women trying to start over. Women who needed someone to believe in them. Maybe because once upon a time someone believed in me. Today, when I look back on that night at the country club, I don't think about the auction. I don't think about the laughter. I think about what came afterward. The truth. The courage. The people who stepped forward when it mattered. The strangest thing about revenge is that it isn't always about making someone suffer. Sometimes it's about refusing to disappear. Sometimes it's about finally recognizing your own value after years of letting someone else define it. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this: never let another person decide what you're worth. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who might need that reminder today. And I'd love to know, have you ever reached a moment in life when telling the truth changed everything?